Good morning, everyone. Please stand if you're not already standing, and join me for We'll Build a Land, number 121. We're doing the first two verses. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by love, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by love, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. We do have one announcement that the church office will be closed this coming week from July 1st to July 5th. Okay. And then we typically say hello to our friends on Zoom. I don't see them, so there they are. Hello. Well, there's a lot of you today. Is there anybody who's new on Zoom?
Hello, I'm Joyce. I'm hosting today. Do we have anybody brand new? Janet is hiding, but she's new.
Oh, okay. Well, we're glad to have you with us. I see some familiar
glad to be here.
faces there. Okay. Well, good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to come together to create a nourishing, liberal, religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice or live justly. We are glad to have you with us. UUCS is a welcoming congregation where your unique experiences, backgrounds, beliefs, and lifestyle are appreciated. If you're one of our long-term members or have been here a short time, or if you're joining us for the very first time today, we are glad to have you with us. We are also grateful for those of you who are streaming the service today. We are delighted to have you with us as well. It's my pleasure to welcome this morning as our guest speaker, Larry Cebula, a professor of history at Eastern Washington University and the assistant digital archivist at Washington State Archives. I look forward to his insights and knowledge on the changing face of local history, and I will introduce him a little bit more in depth later in the service. Now, please take a few moments to greet one another and say hello to someone you haven't met. We'll have more time to greet one another and share our stories during social hour after the service, which, as always, includes great coffee and good conversation. Could you light the chalice? Thank you. We now turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be an offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. So the opening reflection are words from Howard Zinn, an American historian. History is instructive. What it suggests to people is that even if they do little things, if they walk on a picket line, if they join a vigil, if they write a letter to their local newspaper, anything they do, however small, becomes a part of a much larger flow of energy. And when enough people do enough things, however small they are, then change takes place.
Please stand, join me for Find a Stillness number 352. Find a stillness, hold a stillness, let the stillness carry me. Find the silence, hold the silence, let the silence carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. Seek the essence, hold the essence, let the essence carry me. Let me flower, help me flower, watch me flower, carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony.
We will now kindle our candles of care. Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our hearts and minds, and who we want to wrap in our love and care. Let's light a candle of celebration for Elaine Stevens, who will be 90 years of age on July 4th. Let's also light a candle of gratitude for Darrell Vanderlinden, who is now home and doing well after having spinal fusion surgery last week. We also kindle candles for those caught up in the strife in the Middle East and Ukraine. Let us share a moment of silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts and minds this morning. You are welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world at this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
gonna shine in my back door someday. Trouble in mind, it's true. I've almost lost my mind. Never had no much trouble in my life before. I'm going down to the river, gonna take my old rocking chair, and if the blues don't leave me, I'll rock away from there. Trouble in mind, I'm blue, but I won't be blue always, 'cause the sun's gonna shine in my back door someday. 'Cause the sun's gonna shine in my back door someday.
All right, thank you, Madeline and Maura. Today's story takes us way back in history. It is adapted from an Aboriginal creation story from Australia. When the earth was newborn, it was plain and without any features of life. There were no rivers or mountains, no trees, no grasses, only flat red earth as far as the eye could see, except there were no eyes for seeing. Waking time and sleeping time were the same. There were only hollows on the surface of the earth, which one day would become water holes. Around the water holes were the ingredients of life. Underneath the crust of the earth were the stars and the sky, the sun and the moon, as well as all the forms of life, all sleeping. All the tiniest details of life were present, yet not awake or alive. The head feathers of a cockatoo, the thump of a kangaroo's tail, the gleam of an insect's wing, the rustle of eucalyptus leaves in the wind. A time came when time itself split apart and sleeping time separated from waking time. This moment was called the dream time. And at this moment, everything started to burst into life. The sun rose through the surface of the earth and shone warm rays onto the hollows, melting ice, which became the water holes. Under each water hole lay an ancestor, an ancient man or woman who had been asleep through the ages. The sun filled the bodies of each ancestor with light and life, and the ancestors began to give birth to children. The children were all the living things of the world, from the tiniest grub wriggling on a leaf to the broadest winged eagle soaring through the sky. Rising from the water holes, the ancestors stood up with mud falling from their bodies. As the mud slipped away, the sun opened the ancestors' eyelids. They saw the creatures they had made from their own bodies. Each ancestor gazed at their creation in pride and wonderment. Each ancestor sang out with joy, "I am." One ancestor saying, "I am kangaroo." Another saying, "I am cockatoo." The next saying, "I am honey ant." And the next saying, "I am lizard." As they sang, naming their own creations, they began to walk. Their footsteps and their music became one, calling all living things into being and weaving them into life with song. The ancestors sang their way all around the world. They sang the rivers to the valleys and the sand into the dunes, the trees into leaf and the mountains to rise above the plain. As they walked, they left a trail of music. Then they were exhausted. They had shown all living things how to live, and they returned into the earth itself to sleep. We don't see them, but they are still present in every sacred space, and their music still hums through the world.
For the meditation this morning, words from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love, and then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Reeds drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, you know how I feel. Blossom in the tree, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. Dragonfly in the sun, you know what I mean. Butterflies are having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when the day is done, that's what I mean. And this old world is a new world and a bold world for me. And I'm feeling good. Stars when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm Larry Cebula from Eastern Washington University, as explained, and I'm here to talk about local history. And I'll begin by saying the true history of Spokane has never been told. The true history of Spokane has never been told, but we're getting a little closer, I think, as we go along. I thought I should begin, first of all, by defining history, because I think a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of the cultural battles we're fighting right now tend to focus around history, and I think some false understandings of it. To many people, history is simply a list of things that happened in the past, and perhaps you had a high school teacher who taught it that way, names and dates and battles and generals and presidents and so on. I don't think any historian agrees with that definition. History, rather, is a conversation. It's a conversation between the present and the past. We in the present ask the past questions about what happened. And each generation has a different set of questions for the past. And so you get a different set of answers. Sometimes contradictory, but more often just enriching and bringing out new aspects of it that we had ignored. So let's go ahead and begin the PowerPoint. So I've called this presentation The Agony of Local History, and I'll explain why. Many of you perhaps have driven past this monument. Do you recognize where this is? This is the Battle of Four Lakes Monument. You've driven, it's like 100 yards off the road at Four Lakes as you turn off to go into Cheney. There's a little brown sign that says historical marker, and this is what it's pointing towards. And this commemorates, next slide please. This commemorates this guy. And I think you all know who he is. The road out front used to be named after him. This is George Wright. I think today we regard him rightly as a murderer. But for a long time in American history and in local history is regarded as a hero. George Wright rode up out of Walla Walla, Fort Walla Walla in 1858 to punish, as he put it, to terrorize the Native Americans of this region and fought a series of battles. One of them is at Four Lakes, here in the middle of the map. And so in 1935, the citizens of Four Lakes and the citizens of Cheney and the State Historical Society and some others worked together to put up a monument. Next slide. And this monument reads, and I'm realizing now I cannot in fact read it from here, but basically it says at this spot, George Wright defeated 5,000 Allied Indians and that they've maintained a peace ever since. 5,000 is a lot of Indians, and it's a completely made-up figure. Wright faced about 500 Indians, according to his own writing at that point, and other people who were there in the Spokane tribal tradition all have about 500 Indians there. But in 1935, they decided to make it 5,000. And the monument has stood there for what, in almost 100 years now, carved into stone, but an absolute lie, written to make, I think, to make Wright even more glorious. And of course, this is white supremacy. And there's a lot of white supremacy in history, and especially in local history. And this is kind of birth of the nation thing, where one white person is able to fight off, hordes of people of color. Next slide. So how did we get there? Why is local history so often such a mess? And I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint on my phone also so I can read it. There we go. Well, first of all, there are far fewer people working on local history than on national history. For a long time, local history was the work of a few amateurs, and I don't mean that in a derisive way at all, but a few folks without historical training who were deeply interested, and it was easy to become the king of your very small hill of local history. Because so few people are working on it, the secondary literature is weak. That is to say, the books about history of Spokane or of, God forbid, Rosalia are not abundant. And there's very little peer review going on. If you want to publish a book about the Battle of Gettysburg, for example, with the University Press, you'll write the book, it'll go out to other historians who are experts in Gettysburg, they'll read it and pick up any errors you made. In local history, there's rarely such a vetting process. And then they get mixed up with local myths and local pride and white supremacy. The statue is of, this is of course, you can tell from the animation style from a Simpsons episode that I begin every public history class with. And it's the episode is called Lisa the Iconoclast, where she discovers Jebediah Springfield, the founder of the town, was actually a pirate and a murderer. So for all of these reasons, you get these false narratives going. And once something wrong gets out there, you get what I call the mimeograph syndrome. And I think perhaps my students look at me blankly when I say mimeograph, but I think hopefully in this audience you understand those old, you make copies of copies of copies, and they get blurrier and blurrier as we go. Next slide. There's also the problem of sources. For many decades, the only sources available for local history were the same thin gruel and the same people going back and forth over them. There are settler narratives. This is Dan Drumheller. He was a very early pioneer in this area, came out on the Oregon Trail by himself as a teenage boy, became a cattleman in Walla Walla, moved up to Spokane, had a cattle butchery up at Drumheller Spring, it's called today. Eventually became mayor of Spokane. Wrote a wonderfully entertaining book called Tales of Western Adventure from Dan Drumheller, or something like that. But he never mentions in this book the time he murdered an Indian here in Spokane. He was herding his herd of sheep across the first bridge across the Spokane River, and an Indian man thought it would be funny to spook the sheep. So Drumheller got mad and knocked down the Indian man with a club. The Indian man came back with a gun, but was disarmed before he could do anything and was put into jail. And that night, someone snuck up to the jail and slipped a shotgun through the cracks between the logs and murdered the Indian. Dan Drumheller was arrested the next day for this, and the records are not very clear, but they decided, oh, well, let's let him go. And so it is. Next slide. So the settler narratives are very self-serving. Newspapers are somewhat better, and we have some interesting newspapers for early Spokane. But again, it's a set of documents written by the powerful elite, and when less powerful people appear in them, they're from that lens. And also, newspapers, until recent digitization campaigns, were fairly difficult to access. You had to go down to the library, and they'd bring you these giant volumes of them. And going through old newspapers looking for a specific topic is often like hunting for a needle in a haystack. Next slide. And we had censuses and maps, and this colorful image is from a Sanborn map, a fire insurance map, and they showed you where various buildings were downtown. And you also had census records, and those cast some light on local history. Finally, maybe the most influential source for doing local history, next slide, were these county histories. And this is Durham's very comprehensive 3-volume history of the Spokane and the Spokane country, as he says. It was written in 1914. Durham was a Spokesman Review newspaper editor, and he had the advantage in 1914 of being able to talk to pioneers and stuff. So there's a lot of information in here, again, from a certain point of view. So what do we get when you put all these together and then stagnate for a few decades? Next slide. You get a history that doesn't change, and this is the mimeograph syndrome I'm talking about. There's really nothing in Kales's books. He has a series of Spokane books from the 1970s and 80s, and there's not a word in them that's not in Durham somewhere along the way. Next slide. So moving along, I paint a kind of a grim picture of local history, but it's changing, and it's changing fast. And let me give you a few examples of that and why it's changing. Next slide. First of all, digital records, and you're probably aware of this. I used to work, I don't anymore, but I used to work part-time at the Washington State Digital Archives, and they have digitized millions of records for Washington State, including things like birth, marriage, death certificates. It enables you to get a much wider view of the common man and woman of these eras. There's also newspapers online, there's Google Books, there's all kinds of sources about Spokane history. They're often complicated to navigate some of these websites, but there's information at our fingertips once you know how to do it that we never had before. Next slide. And along with that, the other thing the internet has given us is communication. Much of it not good, but some of it very positive. This is a little slide of a group, Facebook group I started called Spokane History Researchers, where those of us who are researching the history of Spokane come and ask each other questions. So we're getting some of that peer review that we didn't have before, and it's been a great resource for my work. Next slide. Finally, new voices and attitudes coming into the space of local history. I began by saying history is the questions we ask of the past. We have a broader part of society asking questions of the past than we used to. And of course, getting all kinds of new information from that. I didn't make a slide for this, but the last thing I should add for the change is professionalization. Nowadays, there's an Office of Historic Preservation manned by trained historians and historic preservationists. At the MAC, the archivist there has a graduate degree in history, which wasn't always true in the, it's been true for a while actually, but if you go back far enough, it wasn't. There are a lot of people with historical training doing local history in our community. Let me give you some examples of how local history is changing. Next slide. One is the Monaghan statue. A lot of you are aware of the controversy swirling around that. James Monaghan was a son of Spokane. He fought very bravely in a very immoral war against American Samoa and was killed by the Samoans. For years, I showed a picture of the Monaghan statue in my public history class, and I asked my students, almost all of them raised in Spokane, who's seen this? And they'd all raise their hands. And I'd say, who is it? And their hands would go down really fast, and they'd look at the floor. Finally, one day, a student said, oh, that's James Monaghan. And I was shocked. I've been doing this for 10 years. And I said, well, yeah, how do you know that? And he goes, well, I'm Samoan. There's a substantial Samoan community here in Spokane, resettled. He goes, we Samoans, we all know who that is. So it's a historical irony that the only people in Spokane who knew who this statue was until recently were the Samoans. The young man said his mother would often point it out, and he used a Samoan phrase I won't try to replicate, but she said, it translates as poor baby. There's the poor baby who tried to destroy our culture, and we got him. So there's an effort now by the Asian Pacific Islander community here in Spokane to get the statue removed. It's going slowly, but I think in the end, the statue will probably be removed. Next slide. Another example is all the sort of ethnic history being done in Spokane, and especially the Black history of Spokane is starting to be filled in. The book Black Spokane came out just, I think, 6 or 8 years ago by Dwayne Mack, and it's an excellent first attempt at telling the African American history in Spokane in one place. And it's shocking it's taken this long for somebody to really do that. And there are other Black historians who have been working on it, but this is the first peer-reviewed thing. But we're also unearthing more information. Last fall, I was involved in a project led by the Spokane Public Library and the Carl Maxey Center called Community Scanning Day. And basically, the Carl Maxey Center reached out to the African American community in Spokane and said, hey, bring your historic photographs to the Carl Maxey Center on this Saturday, and we'll digitize them and we'll put them into a database of Spokane history. That day, we digitized 540 photographs that members of the African community brought in, from African American pioneers to childhood pictures of future WNBA stars, sliding on the red wagon. And that's going into a database that you can find online at the Spokane Public Library. Look for the Carl Maxey collection. Next slide. A completely new venue of history in Spokane is LGBTQ history. It's really not been explored in a significant way in the past. There was an oral history project, and the MAC has those archives. This is the Spokane Pride and Remembrance Project, and what it is a timeline, and you're just seeing one part of it here. But it's this massive set of panels, and I think it's going to be on display. I'm working to get it on display at Easter, and it was displayed at a Pride event last month in the park, and it's incredibly well researched. And if I have any influence at all, we'll make it into a museum exhibit, hopefully. Next slide. The Chinese and the Japanese in Spokane is an under-researched area, and there was a great exhibit, and it might still be up, I'm not quite sure, at the Northwest Room at the new Spokane Public Library. That's by far the deepest research anybody's done on this topic. It's just absolutely superb. It's called In Search of Trent Alley. So researching Spokane had numerous Japanese and Chinese people and businesses in the very earliest decades of the city. They're absolutely vital to the economic and cultural life of the city. And for the most part, it was lost over the years, but it's being brought back up. Next slide. I've just got two more of these. One, I talked about digital presentation and publication. This is my baby, Spokane Historical, and a lot of you have probably run into this website. Students in my classes, instead of writing me a paper and I put a grade on it and they throw it away, they research a historic site in Spokane and they write a short article for this website. And there are over 700 historical sites in the Spokane area on the website now. We've been at this for about 10 years. And there are sources at the bottom where they got the information. Finally, next slide, I'll only talk about this briefly because I understand a year ago you had Logan Campo-Reale. He's a former student of mine. He works now at the Spokane Historic Preservation Office, but he's also been my right-hand man in this project of finding racial covenants. And what you see, you can't see it very well here, but on the left is a map of Spokane. It's a screen grab of a GIS map showing all the properties impacted by racially restrictive covenants. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it means a property record that says basically only white people may live here. They're ruled illegal in 1968, but they're still on the books for 7,500 houses in Spokane. And in the next few weeks, we'll be releasing a map of there, along with instructions of how to remove those if your house is affected. So we're in a revolution in local history with new voices, new sources, increased accuracy, and I think a better understanding of the past that made us all. On the other hand, next slide, and I'm remembering now, I couldn't bring myself to do a screen grab of it, so I was reviewing all of this a couple of days ago as I was finalizing the presentation. I was feeling pretty satisfied with the work a lot of us have been doing, which is always a dangerous thing to feel. And so I just Googled Spokane history, and my first hit was a TikTok video that's had 34,000 views about the hidden network of tunnels under Spokane, Washington, which do not exist. I was on the Historic Preservation Commission for years. This is just an absolute myth. 34,000 views. And so I made a little comment on it. I go, this is nonsense and isn't true. And I haven't opened it yet, but I noticed I have an email this morning from the person who's created the TikTok, who I told earlier that this is not true. And he says, can we have a conversation? And so I guess we can. Next slide. If any of you are interested in this, a lot of those slides have hyperlinks to the projects I was talking about. So I made this QR code, and you can scan it or you can come up to me afterwards. So that's my presentation.
For the closing, or do we sing first?
We sing first. We do have a little more time. I don't know if you wanted to answer any questions or anything, because we have about 15 minutes.
That's a great idea.
Does anybody? I'm making this up as we go, but would anybody like to ask any questions, or do we want to sing and get out of here? Yeah, you got a question? Okay, let's do this. That's a great presentation, and you have a lot of knowledge. So, yeah.
My question is from the perspective of a K-12 educator. I was a history teacher, mostly in Colorado, and then in Washington, and I was in Central Valley, and they were working pretty closely with tribal leaders to kind of reinvigorate the local history curriculum. What is the role of K-12 education?
And could you repeat the question so that people listening can hear it?
The question was the role of K-12 education in this. And you mentioned Central Valley. I'm assuming you know Leslie Heffernan, who's a force of nature out there. I've known for many years. To the extent most people learn history, it's either in the elementary schools or it's, how to put this, from the atmosphere after you leave from the History Channel or visiting a museum or stuff like that. So the role of teachers is vital. On the other hand, teachers are on the cutting edge of these culture wars, but through no fault of their own or any intention. And, I'm friends with some very progressive high school teachers in Spokane who are often in their principal's office talking about an email that some parents sent them for having talked about white supremacy in class or something like that. So teachers have an important role, but they need our support and they need our training very much, especially in the elementary grades. I think a person teaching local history perhaps hasn't had a lot of preparation in local history. So I'd like to see more of that.
I'm curious if people on Zoom, if anybody on Zoom had any questions too, we could maybe include them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of a trivia question about Spokane.
Okay.
So many years ago, I found a beautiful fedora at a shop up in Hilliard, and it said made expressly for Hat Freeman, Spokane. And I did a little research, and Hat Freeman may have been a Greek boxer who ran a men's haberdashery in Spokane, maybe back in the 30s, or he may have been the African-American born in Railroad Alley to a woman from North Carolina. And one was African-American, the one born in Railroad Alley, the other was maybe Greek. And there was a Freeman building downtown named for one of these two Freemen. What do you know about that?
The question is, what do I know about Hat Freeman? He found a fedora, and there's various parentages to Hat Freeman attributed out there on the internet. I don't know a lot, except that he was a very significant business person. You see old photographs of Riverside, and there's the signs for the Hat Freeman shop in nearly all of them. I can tell you who does know, and that's somebody in the Spokane History Researchers Facebook page. There's, I think, 6,000 people there now, not all of them actively researching, but probably 100 of them. And in particular, one contributor, Liz, who's now on the Historic Preservation Commission, knows something about Hat Freeman. I'm gonna volunteer here just because I'm sure she does. So please join the group, post the question, because now I want to know the answer. Anything else?
You got a question up there?
Okay. On Zoom?
Sure, it's Terry Anderson here. I thank you very much for that presentation. I live a long way from Spokane, and I wonder if this is kind of typical of small, mid-sized American cities, or is this growing renaissance that you're obviously a big part of kind of in every city of this size or community these days?
That's a great question, and I don't know how well I am equipped to answer it. I only know Spokane, but I do, go to my national organizations meetings. I think this is very widespread. For example, this racial covenants work that we're doing here in Washington, other communities are doing that as well, and we have an informal group and meet on Zoom quarterly. So I think it's pretty widespread, and I think it's, to some extent, part of America's racial reckoning. And this post-George Floyd world, I think America is, or some Americans are facing up to our past in a way that we haven't previously. So I think it's fairly widespread.
Thank you.
Is there another Zoom?
My name is Joyce Francis. I'm on the Olympic Peninsula in Port Townsend, Washington. I know that as of this year, there's a Washington state law that requires schools to give a curriculum for all grades informing students about the governance, the culture, and the history of their nearest native tribe. We have a wonderful Jamestown Slalom tribe near us that's created a wealth of information that's being shared in our schools. Is that happening in Spokane too?
Yes, it's absolutely happening in Spokane. Again, I think this is a nationwide thing, a revival of Native culture happening in Spokane and elsewhere. In Spokane, we have the Salish School that teaches it's an immersion program in the Salish language for K through 12, for example. The Spokane tribal historian Warren Saylor is a great guy, and he's worked with school teachers. So it's definitely happening. I've worked with teachers a lot, and there's an earlier law too requiring teachers to talk about local tribes, but not actually providing any resources for them to learn about this. And often the local tribes have priorities that are not helping white teachers teach white children. There are other concerns in the tribal community a lot of times. So it'd be nice to see, it's a great idea. It'd be nice to see some more support for it.
Bruce?
Yes, my name is Bruce Nonson. I live in New York City, and thank you very much for your presentation. It was fascinating. Thank you also very much for mentioning LGBT issues, and you mentioned that teachers are often criticized because they talk about white supremacy. I know that teachers are also being criticized or even fired if they even talk about LGBT issues. And I'm wondering if you want to speak to that. Certainly within the LGBT community, all of those letters, I'd say the trans people are attacked the most. And it's certainly affecting any teachers that talk about gender affirming care or anything like that. So I wonder if you could speak to that for a bit.
Well, I think I'm, preaching to the choir here. I mean, the Don't Say Gay law in Florida, we're all familiar with, and it's, it became a national model for some of the red states. It's appalling and it's horrifying, and it's requiring teachers to teach history incorrectly, to skip over important things. Somebody once said that the LGBTQ community is the one American minority that's distributed randomly with each generation across the population. And it's so very true. There are gay people in every town. There are gay teenagers just figuring it out in every high school in America. And we've taken such massive steps back in the last couple of years in some parts. It's a culture war. I think it's a culture war we're ultimately winning, but one step forward, one step back.
I think Ron Strange has his hand up too.
Yes. Can the removal of statues run the risk of just canceling history?
Sure, I get that a lot. You're erasing history when you take down a statue. And I would point out the fact that none of my students knew who Robert Monaghan was, though they had walked by it or driven by it their whole lives, except for that one. I don't think statues were ever erected to teach history. They were not in any intellectually honest manner. They're erected to push a certain point of view. And maybe that's okay, depending on what the point of view is, but our point of view changes over time. And it's kind of a sarcastic answer when people say, if you take down statues, you're erasing history. I'll sometimes lean in and I'll say, let me tell you about something called books, because there are books for history, so you can still learn it.
And I think one more, Julie.
Yes, let's see if I can get my camera right so you can see who I am. I think it's an important matter who is offended by taking down of the statues and why. I grew up in New Orleans, and I'm well aware that the issues, some of the issues there, the statues a lot of times in New Orleans are to Confederate heroes. And a lot of people like to worship those heroes. And it's a really complex situation where, in the Civil War, you had a lot of poor white men who were convinced to fight for the rights of rich white men to own slaves. And these poor white men's descendants still worship that person and think that he did a great thing in fighting in the Confederacy. And there was a lot of propaganda, fear, and hate mongering around about Black people in order to get poor white people to fight in the Civil War. And there still is a lot of propaganda, fear, and hate mongering about Black people to get people to still glorify these people who fought for the rights of other people to own slaves, even though it was against their own best interests. Well, it was, a lot of them died. So I just want to point out some of the complexities here is all, and ask if you have comments.
Sure, those are great remarks. I'll add a level of complexity here, which is if you look at when these statues were put up, they're in a very specific political moment, often for a very specific political purpose. After the Civil War, there's a process called Reconstruction, where Blacks in the South get a lot of civil rights and are able to vote. But in the end of that Reconstruction process, the white Southerners rebel and the Ku Klux Klan rises, and they take those voting rights away from Blacks and institute Jim Crow. And that is the moment at which many of these statues are put up. They're kind of victory laps from the people who've taken the rights away from Blacks again. And if you look at the speeches made when these statues are put up, they're pretty much full of crowing about that kind of thing. This statue is to our Aryan ancestors, or our Anglo-Saxon blood, or our Caucasian race, things like that. They're very much put up there. Those statues are put up to intimidate Black people. That was the reason. And that's not dissimilar from the Monaghan statue. If you look at the speeches made when the statue was put up, I think in 1911, there's a lot of white supremacy rhetoric there.
Maybe just one more question?
Okay, and I'll stick around later.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Shouldn't the statues be put in museums so that people can see them? Because statues are a little different than reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
They make a statement, and in a way they're kind of artistic. But it's like the museums like in Krakow. Nobody wants to go to those museums and see those. You're saying you read a book, but yet when you go to Krakow,
Yeah.
it's Krakow. Am I getting it right? It makes a huge impression, and you have people that are history deniers, and I think that the statues should go in museums and not just be torn down.
This point is often brought up. What do you do with the statues afterwards? And I have kind of two reactions to that. And one is that I don't care very much, but that's me. But the statue of Monaghan, for example, it's a very artistically well-done statue. It was a University of Washington faculty member and sculptor who did it. It's just very nicely detailed. It's a good statue, as statues go. My friends in the museum world, when you say, oh, that statue should go in a museum, they get super nervous because they're thinking, oh my God, where am I going to put that thing? It's 10 feet tall, it's huge, we'll need a crane to get in and out of the building, and how often are we actually going to put it on display? Most of you probably know your average museum, the displays are like the part of the iceberg that's above the water, and the collections in the back rooms are the rest of the iceberg, and often those collection rooms are full. So I don't know what happens to them. There's some interesting examples from Eastern Europe where they've made sort of like gardens out of Stalin statues. So there's like 100 Stalins and things like that. My joking suggestion is a paintball place with these. But I agree that probably something should be done with it, but it shouldn't be in a position of veneration in our community. So,
I think, Alan, do you want to do one more? Okay.
It's not a question, but suffice a comment. It was on cable, whatever. It's called The Neutral Ground, and it got into real deep on this history that you talked about, as well as the inconsistencies of that history. Are you familiar with it?
no, the question was about a cable TV program, I take it, called The Neutral Ground, and no, I don't know it.
Well, it started out as attempted to be a comedy about some of this stuff, and as the person dug into it, he found he had a difficult problem making something that did justice to the material. And I forget, it's quite a bit about it on public radio, if you would know.
Okay. Okay, neutral ground, I'll be looking that up. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks for all the questions. Please stand, join me for our last hymn, number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night.
The closing words are from Ban Ki-moon. Throughout the human history, in any great endeavor requiring the common effort of many nations and men and women everywhere, we have learned it's only through seriousness of purpose and persistence that we ultimately carry the day. We might liken it to riding a bicycle. You stay upright and move forward so long as you keep up the momentum. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.
Shalom Chavarim, Shalom Chavarim, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Chavarim, Shalom.